Before I get started, I want to thank Meredith first for having me here. There's really few and far between curators who I've worked with that have been so generous and open to dialogue and kind and truly altruistic in an art world that can sometimes be very much the opposite of all of that. So you're all really lucky to have her here, and just please round of applause for Meredith. Thank you for having me here. And also my old friend Mark Nevins for including my work in the show and helping me stay afloat all these years. It's really, this show is one of the better shows I've seen in a long time, and I wouldn't say that, as Mark knows, if I didn't believe it was true. It's a really diverse array of works. They clash at times with one another to generate what I would consider positive tension. His collection is not by any means myopic or just centrally focused on one thing. I think he's one of those rare collectors who actually loves what he sees and then lets his instincts follow him from there. And then he gets really interested in the artists and the artworks. And you can see that evidenced in the show that's got put up. I would come back to it again and again if I were you here. So thank you, Mark, for always supporting me and putting this together. We gotta give him some applause there. All right, let's jump in. So this is the first piece of artwork of mine that was ever stolen. And it was at the Cordova Museum in 2013. It was a show called Abstract Photography Then and Now, which linked photographers like Laszlo Moholy-Nagy and André Kertész, who were working with experimental techniques back in the 1920s until about the 1960s. And then it was mixed with contemporary artists who were exploring the materiality of the medium as well. And on opening night, well, the pre-opening night for all the donors, I had a series, which I'll show you, which is titled Interchanges, B-Sides, and Remixes, as you can see. It's a series of 2¼ Polaroids that they don't make anymore. And I would tend to use text a lot in my work. And so this originally was going to be formatted as a book, which it ended up being, but this was the first image on the wall. And they were just Polaroids taped to the wall, going for about 110 of them down a long hallway in the Cordova. So I got a phone call the next day from then curator Lexi Lee Sullivan saying, I could tell she was nervous. I'm like, what's going on? She's like, okay, somebody stole the first piece in the show. And this is at the Cordova. I was like, oh, that's cool. She's like, what? I'm like, well, someone liked it enough that they just thought they could steal it. That's kind of a compliment. And she laughed and I laughed. Honestly, it's like, what are you going to do? So the show was open to the public. The actual opening reception was about 4 days later. And she got this in the mail. They didn't put a return address. But the note in there said, obviously, I have no idea how or why I ended up with this. Sorry. So long story short, at the end of this, I hope you don't feel the same way that that note reads about my lecture here today. And if you do, feel free to mail me a complaint without a return address. So going off, the works are going to be not so linear as far as the series. And by any means, if anybody has any questions, just raise your hand or kindly shout, and we can discuss certain aspects of the work. Like I said, I'm going to go through these a little bit quickly. This is the first time, this is back in 2011, I started the series, and they don't make this film anymore. And I will go into the technical aspects just because some of you might be art majors, photography majors, interested in photography in general. So it's worth just touching on the materials that, like these, aren't available anymore. So Fuji made this direct positive color film where you just basically rubbed your hands together on it after you made exposure in a camera, and after a minute and a half you peel it apart, and you had a unique direct positive print, aka a Polaroid, right? It was made by Fuji, so direct positive print. And this was at a time when the film is now discontinued. It's been discontinued for about 8-10 years, which is really a shame because it's a great way to quickly proof what you want to do, possibly in another format, but also it's more akin to just like jotting down a quick thought, making a quick experimentation, making quick notations of light. And so I also ended up taping. You can see the tape marks here on the bottom left and or top left and bottom right. This title, which came towards the end, because all of the works that are Polaroids in this series, these small, little, beautiful, unique, colorful objects, they are either interchanges, meaning from one image to the next. They have this sort of rhythm that's more musical than anything else. They are B-sides because a lot of them are just not as good as the other ones I made after them. And they're remixes because I would actually use that smaller camera to remix newer works that were already quote-unquote finished. So it made me reconsider how what you consider a larger finished piece can actually lead you to something else, which is supposedly a smaller sketch, but might just has as much relevance as something larger. So I'll go through these as a kind of river of images. And the text fades. And you'll see down the line there's a couple riffs on these that show up in farther processes, even to work I'm making now, 11 years later. And all these little pockmarks right here, that's just from the chemistry. Since it's instant film, the developer and the fixer slide together, so when you peel it apart, you sometimes get these beautiful little imperfections in there. So if you see what looks like almost like snowflakes, that's just the chemistry not fully laying onto the paper. Which brings me to an exhibition I had. Was the first of a few exhibitions of the same name, titled Moving Across the Interior. It was at the ICA in Portland, Maine in 2014. And it might be a little hard to see, but that's my great uncle Vic in Wyoming. And I'll zoom in as much as I can. And this is a series of photographs that I didn't know until the Thanksgiving of 2013 when my drunken uncle told me, I was telling him I was having a photography exhibition in Maine, and he goes, "You know your great uncle Vic owned a hotel up there, right?" I was like, "No." He's like, "You know he was a photographer, right?" I'm like, "No." Like, "You know he was an avid filmmaker." I'm like, "Where is all this stuff?" He's like, "It's in the basement. You're all the wine." I'm like, "Great, take me down, let's go see it." So I ended up taking 4 huge boxes of his photographs and films, which I then ended up using for the exhibition, along with images of my own work that I've been photographing in Maine. And he owned a hotel, the Tamarack Motel in Brunswick, Maine, which is right near where I used to photograph a lot. I had no idea of any of this part of his history, or much about him at all. He was a pretty mysterious guy. He was a bit of a gypsy. He moved around a lot. Especially didn't know that he was a photographer, and a really great one. Better than me in many ways, actually. But I don't believe in much, but I think that this is a really strange circumstance that he made this in front of the ice that was falling from his cabin on September 25th, 1984. Without ever seeing this image, I started making a series called Shot Reverse Shot, and I made this one on January 12th, 2011. Coincidence? Sure. Did it freak me out? Yeah. And there was a lot of other photographs that he had taken that I had taken, which were basically facsimiles of one another. So, for lack of a better term, if there's anything that I can put a little bit of credence is its eternal return, especially within our families. Let's go back again. I mean, it was very, very different pictures, but very strange occurrence. And so during that time, I was making these reverse shot images where I would put the date stamp on the bottom left. There's one that's going to be hung up in the exhibition that I just brought up today. That's in Mark's collection. So these are images where, similar to the film I was using with Interchanges, B-sides, and Remixes, they made black and white film. And the film speed itself, you don't have to know much about photography, but really quick, the film speed itself is it's called 3000 ISO, which means it's hyper sensitive to light, which also makes the film really high contrast. I'm talking about this image here on the left. And so I would use that same camera I used. It's a medium format camera that just accepts peel apart Polaroid film to make an exposure of a photogram, a piece of darkroom paper that I'm holding out in the world, out in the woods, here behind this tree that had been near the Department of Public Works, which had little holes poked in the hose during wintertime, so we created this enormous ice tree that was there all winter. And so what you're essentially seeing, being a shot reverse shot, is I have the camera set up on a tripod. I take the darkroom paper, which on the image on the left I'm holding it, it's unexposed. And I either have a friend trip the shutter with the camera that has a flash on it, or I use a long extension tube, shutter release that I would press with my foot. Essentially what's happening is I'm documenting the making of a photogram. I'm documenting the making of a flash going off, the camera recording the photogram being made, and then the resulting photogram. So as you can see, my hands right here are traced on the left. So it's a simultaneous activity of disassembling the darkroom. Instead of using an enlarger to project a negative down to a sheet of paper, what I'm essentially doing is using the camera and the lens and the film as the recording element and the flash on top of the camera to illuminate the paper, which then gets exposed and I go put the paper away and develop in the darkroom. So it's a true shot and then the inversion of what you're witnessing being exposed to the reverse shot. And it's also worth noting very quickly that I came upon doing the series for a couple reasons. Number one, because I was broke and I couldn't afford to use an enlarger and paper. I couldn't buy one, so this was my way of using an economy of means to keep making work. The film and the paper were cheap enough. I didn't need a dark room because I had the nighttime in Maine, which lasts like 23 hours. And I had the camera and flash, which was my enlarger, and then I had the paper, and then I had the entire landscape to play around in and make these photograms. And one more thing, not to get too bookish, but the title was inspired by a passage from a Jean-Luc Godard interview where he talked about the shot reverse shot technique in cinema being all wrong, about how usually this shot and reverse shot is filming somebody. It's either you and me face to face. They film you talking, film me listening. Sometimes they'll film both of us talking. Sometimes they'll be to the side. But he said that technique is all wrong, where if we, the audience members sitting in the theater, sitting at home, want to be the listener, you should film the listener behind the person who's listening's shoulder so you can listen with them and see the person talking. And their reaction is your reaction because you're not seeing it. You get absorbed by it. So I thought, how is there a way to use that cinematic technique in photography? So yes, it is a conceptual art project, There's a very stringent set of tools that I can use. I have this one camera, this one film type, and this paper, and those are the rules of the game. And it's got to be blunt. Every one of these, I look directly into the camera. I gotta resize that. Come on. So this is the first one I ever made on my studio in New Jersey with 8x10 paper. This was with 20x24 paper. And this is the wisteria outside of my studio in New Jersey, which has been a constant watershed, touchstone for my practice. I have no problem admitting I am a homebody. I'm lucky enough to have my mom and dad still around, and back when I was broke before I moved to Maine being broke, I moved in back in with my folks, cleaned out my mom's old art studio where she had taught art lessons when I was a kid, growing up to make extra money, and I turned it into my studio. And so I still go back and photograph in the garden all the time, and also make photograms and unique works out there. So this is the first one I ever made, and then this one is also in my father's garden. For every one that you see that looks somewhat decent, there's about 20 others where I just had no idea what I was doing. Either I'm making like a goofy face, or I dropped the paper, or like the image isn't lined up. And because I have to do it really quickly, it has to be on an overcast night where the moon isn't that bright, otherwise the paper will just fog, so it'll just turn black. So it's working really, really quickly, so I'm taking it out. And that's why I'm kind of just like looking like a deer in the headlights, because I think I know where the camera is, but I generally set it up and kind of get these, these more oblique angles. And this is again in the garden behind the studio where I grew up, a magnolia tree. Another stipulation was because I was working there, I could not cut down my father's plants. He would inflict some sort of pain on me. And so that was another obstacle where, I have to respect the property. I can't go chopping his garden down, but it also enabled me to try and be a bit more thrifty and creative as far as having that be another constraint. So I have to go out into the environment and make these photograms and not manipulate things the way I normally would if I just gather things in a dark room. I have all these freedoms as far as generating new forms in a dark room. You can see what you're doing with the red light on. You can place things however. This is more just like, would this make an interesting photograph? Let's see. And just like smushing the paper up against the surface. Again, any questions, feel free to let me know. This is the piece that is going to be hanging in the show today. It's in the collection of Mark. This is one of the bigger pieces I had made at the time. This is actually the same spot as where I took this reverse shot, but this is 4 20 by 24 panels that I taped together in the back. So it was pretty wonky to hold together. But I wanted to increase the scale to see how the different types of forms could generate different type of kinetic content, meaning if I zoom in, you can see my legs there, and I'm holding paper up there, can't really see my face, but you get my fingers are in focus holding the paper, and you get this form of the wisteria. It doesn't focus, but this branch right here is like, I'd say a good 1.5 feet out. So even though it's a completely flat surface, that difference between a couple inches from the surface of the paper, it's almost like when you're focusing a camera and it goes from out of focus to in focus in shallow depth of field. The same principle happens when you use a piece of paper out in the world. I just found that really interesting that it would, I know it might be obvious, but I found it pretty interesting that it would actually happen that way. There is a one-to-one correlation between light coming into a film camera hitting film, the same as there is holding out a sheet of paper and having objects in front of it, which then create depth of field as well. This is also one from the cherry blossom in the garden in early spring in April. And this is a maple tree. You can see my skinny legs wearing shorts over there. And this one was on top of the studio. I'll zoom in so you can see it. So there's me hanging out on the roof. And it was actually going to be a scroll, a panel of 4 pieces, but the other 3 I didn't tape right and they just dropped off. So I was left with this one piece. It's solarized a bit, meaning that the ambient light got to it, because I was on top of the roof, so I had to, in the dark, climb down and have it exposed to light. So there was a little bit of solarization, the ambient light from the light pollution in the night sky hitting it, which made it more black on the bottom left. And then I started working with mesh screen with this series. It was a pretty simple one-to-one reason why I started doing it is because the sliding screen door had a lot of holes in it, so there was a lot of mosquitoes and bugs getting into my studio, and I don't want to get bit by mosquitoes. So I cut out the screen, replaced it, had it in my studio, and I was thinking, well, has a tactile kind of beautiful quality. Like, it's all these imperfections. It's really old. As I moved it around in my hand, all different types of moire patterns started forming. And then as I started looking at it, I was thinking, like, well, the screen is a utilitarian object in this sense, where it keeps, bugs and debris out of the studio at night. But it's also a grid. It's essential, and the grid is the mother, literally, of all mechanical reproduction, visual mechanical reproduction, all the way back dating from silk yarns to offset to anything that you read, even on your phones, on your computers. Anything that's ever been printed has used a grid matrix. Not saying that's all packed into this, but just to give you a sense of like the back burner stuff that's going on in my mind. Like, I was thinking, well, this simple material can have possibility of generating things that possibly I might not ever have considered before. So again, this one I'm smiling in the corner of the studio, just doing a quick test, trying to see what it's going to look like. And then I started using that same corner right there, and these two are laid out in the corner of the studio. So kind of trying to push with the photograph in the left something that is more three-dimensional in the sense of it looks like it's a corner of the room, looks like it's an open book. And then when this print on the right is mounted, it's mounted flush. So you get that tension between something being photographically reproduced as having depth and then something seeming a lot more flat on the right-hand side. I really love the kind of happy accident. It almost looks like I'm drawing with the mesh in the photogram on the right. And that led me to a newer series, which started up being titled Lattice Ambient. Lattice referencing the grid structure and the lattice structure of the actual mesh screen itself. And ambient because I use an ambient light source in order to make these photograms. And to make these, I use the same flash that I would use to make the reverse shot images, the black and white images, except it took me about 2 years. I figured out how to make, in my pockets, cyan, magenta, yellow, and green filters. When I say it took me 2 years, I needed to test different color filters on colored darkroom paper to see exactly what kind of colors I could get. And I noticed that if I use a cyan filter, and this one's about 50 by 50 inches, so they're laid out on the floor. In the color darkroom, it's complete darkness. There's no safe light. So I can't see what I'm doing. I have to feel everything out by muscle memory. So if I have a gel filter over the flash, and it's going to be for cyan, if I'm really, really close to the paper and illuminate the paper with the flash with a screen on top of it, you're going to get more of a cyan value here. More of a dark blue value here. If I take 2 giant steps back, I know that'll be lighter and more cyan. So it's really working with color and projection through muscle memory. So it's almost like a blind dance with the materials that I'm doing. They take anywhere between 10 to 20 minutes to make. The illumination itself is literally just from a small chintzy handheld flash I got for $5 at a garage sale. And I need it to be really low voltage because the paper is highly sensitive, especially to ambient light. So I'll go through these a bit more. And what you're seeing is literally just the paper, flash as a light source with a gel filter stuffed in my pockets, and mesh screen. And in between each exposure, I would get on my knees, reconfigure the mesh, and then illuminate it from different angles. So what you're seeing in this one is about 6 different exposures, where sometimes I illuminate it from basically the horizon level of paper, almost even with the paper. Sometimes it's directly on top. And it would almost work like making a blind map tracing, where you're arranging all of the mesh at once. And I started using larger rolls so I could actually have a mass of materials and make more and more exposures. And I'll zoom in a little bit because there's some parts where you get these beautiful moire patterns that happen. There's some areas that just look like color fields. There's certain parts that look like offset patterns. And these are all, obviously, I mean, they're all unique. Oh, I'm not doing that. And they started pushing.
What are the colors on the gels?
So the colors are cyan, magenta, yellow, green. Cyan, magenta, yellow, and green. But the thing about them is that since it's color negative paper, if I'm making a cyan photogram, a cyan exposure, the filter is red. So in color theory and light, unlike painting, it's red, green, blue are the additive, and the opposites of them are cyan, magenta, and yellow. And they all meet in the middle. Trust me, I'm not going to go into color theory thing here. But if I could just use those four colors, because if I have cyan and yellow, then I'm going to get magenta, because they equal out. So it's really just like, stems from me being a professional color printer back when I was going to FIT. I got I'm 3 credits shy. My parents still remind me of that, of having graduated from FIT with an associate's in applied science. And then I dropped out and I started working in the photo district, or what used to be the photo district. And I worked the graveyard shift from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. for about a year, making contact sheets. That's how in demand, like, film and color processing was. And they did high-end fashion jobs. They did work for Reuters. Everything at that point was still film. This is in 2000 to 2003. I was living in Brooklyn working there. So I learned most of this technique by working that job. I worked my way up to being a mural printer and working with specific clients over the course of the years. And I learned more there than I did almost in any of my other education, because I had to have the job in order to live and survive. But I also really loved photography, and I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. But having this highly technical setting where you get to learn about color theory on hands-on experience, and not in a classroom where if you don't have the tactile ability to make these things, it can be an abstraction sometimes. And here's some more. I push the scale, and also, like in this one, the actual visual representation of the screen isn't as prominent as like some of the more harder edged areas. That's because the mesh itself is piled a bit higher. So if it's piled higher, then the mesh itself would be more out of focus. So you can get more color fields to a degree. And if also I missed an area, like here on the right, where the mesh wasn't actually covering the entire piece of paper, then it would just turn totally black from all the exposures that would happen in that area. And it would be remiss of me not to mention that a big part, which I didn't realize at first, but a big part of why I started using screen also and came upon this was because I took a silk screening class my last semester in grad school with a really great artist, Rochelle Feinstein. I'm not sure if she's still working there, but this was in 2008. And I hadn't picked up a paintbrush or pencil or anything in a long time. I was like photography like to the gills. It was like FIT was a heavily scientific program at the time. It was an associate's in applied science. It was very technical. Then I went to Art Institute of Boston, and then went to Yale for grad school. And I was wondering, why am I not taking other classes? It just seemed like tunnel vision, and it was. I'll also say that I was the worst silk screening student Rochelle probably ever had. I still try it. I'm awful. I can't do it. So if anyone can help, please let me know. But one of the things that helped being awful with it is that I broke a couple screens and I flooded them with ink. And for those of you who silk screened before, you can't press too hard on the screen when you're actually flooding it, otherwise you break the screen and the ink just floods. And then I pressed so hard that the ink flooded and the screen came with it on the paper. And I basically destroyed the paper. But the print I got looked kind of like how a small sketch of one of these would look like. And I didn't think about that until like 4 years later when I was in the midst of this and thinking like, oh, that's a huge part of this, because the color buildup, like what happens down here with the orange or up here with the black and the blue, or even how it builds up at the sides and this like little slither of blue and cyan. I remembered that in the midst of making these, how beautiful that kind of broken screen was, and how with putting too much pressure, that when you're squeegeeing the screen, that there's a lot of colorful ink that can build up. So the same thing applies to when I'm making these photograms, meaning if I pile the screen really, really thick, like over here on this edge, let's say on this bottom corner, and I pop off the cyan filter and I do it a couple of times, it's going to go to black, to blue, and it's just going to build and build and build on one side. So it's just like silk screening. If I illuminate it, say my hand is the paper, if I illuminate it from the horizon of the paper, from basically the grain of the paper, you're just getting these raking patterns of light that go across just like it would if you were using a squeegee to go across the surface of the paper. Okay. And then these went from being numbered lattice ambient number 34, number 72, to them being labeled after the songs that I would listen to in my CD player in the darkroom. I'd mix CDs, and whatever song was playing when I was making the piece, that'd be the one. So there's 3 shadowboxing photograms from Wu-Tang's shadowboxing. Shadowboxing 1, 2, 3, they look nothing like each other, but that was just my new thing. I was like, whatever song is playing, that also has a sensory kind of instinctual aspect of making the work. I thought like, well, this song is more like red and needs to be more like aggressive and overwhelming. This song needs to be a bit more muted and a bit more monochromatic. And I can't explain why, other than it just felt right with the work I was making, the music I was listening to at the time. This one's actually called the Black Lodge. Not after the Twin Peaks Black Lodge, but this band Twin Teaks made a track called the Black Lodge that's just nuts. So that's what happened here. And this one's White Flower after a Beach House song. Now we get into my terrible drawing skills. This was a diagram of a piece I want to make for, again, rewinding to my great uncle and finding his tome of images. All the while figuring out that show, I had been making these lattice ambient works. I had about 2 years' time to figure out the show. So sometimes I make sketches for still lifes and other works, and this one is the fabric, the mesh screen I would use, which you can see up here as a kind of light refraction. I had walked and seen a part of a lobster trap that just looked like this like beautiful diamond shape, looked like a lattice, similar to, it's kind of a theme that pops up, similar to some of the forms in the photograms I was making. And I bought this gridded pattern piece of drop cloth. So the mesh screen made the actual piece of lobster trap stand up straight just by value of having it tacked to the front, and it's hard to do justice in a slide. This one's called Diamond Cloak, and this was the front room of the ICA in Portland, Maine. These other 2 works on the left are really fun. They're called double negative pyramids, and they were made by scoring the back of, I cut down 2024 sheets of black and white darkroom paper to be 20 by 20 squares, and then I scored them on the back, which is where these marks come from, and made them into these pyramids by taping them together. And I would illuminate them, so it would be sculpturally laying on a table, and I would illuminate them from one side the same flash I used for the shot reverse shot works, same $5 flash I used for the Lattice Ambient works. And I just did it just to see what would happen at first. I was curious, you know, it had no conceptual overreach. I was just wondering what would happen if I did this. And I realized that the darker areas are where the flash hit the paper directly, but the other areas have these values which were not directly exposed to light, but then the light kind of went through the paper and was able to sort of warp and wrap around these like tent pyramids I had set up. So, and you can see the tape up here that bled through when it got exposed.
But they're flat.
Yeah, they're mounted flat.
Yeah, so that like it has an illusion of being three-dimensional, but it's not, it's flat.
Yeah, exactly. So this one, so there's two here. So the one on the left, it's two panels that are side to side and they're flattened out, mounted to aluminum. And this one in the corner is two panels again that I then mounted into that corner of the wall. And it was a while ago, so even if I took a video, then it wouldn't have really done it justice. But you only see this diamond structure when you're standing directly in front of it. If you move and you look at it, it warps in really bizarre ways. The lines just kind of shift. I'm not quite sure why, but I'll take it. And with this one, there was this great happy accident that happened where there was a little shadow that fell, which I know it's not, you know, it's a slide, so you can't really see the depth, but it has a strange ability to really pop off the page, which mimics the more sculptural way it was made in the first place. And this was part of the show, so me and the curator, Daniel Fuller, who was there for about 8 years at the ICA in Portland, Maine, we had the idea where that front room I showed you was the entry to the show. The middle room I made into my dark room and studio space throughout the course of a month and a half. And then the back room was a collection of photographs that I reprinted that were my great uncle's from his archive, and also photographs I had made in Maine. And the show was titled Moving Across the Interior. We had a real hard time coming up with a title for the show. And I was driving home from the studio one day. I had a studio in Westbrook, Maine, and I lived in Portland. And I was just thinking, I'm like, what are we going to call this show? Like, me and Grandpappy in Maine, like, what's going on? Like, it's just like knocking myself unconscious thinking about this. And this is no joke. I was driving, it was snowing, and I turned on the Weather Channel for some reason. I had a tape player in my old Jeep, and it was all static electricity, and then all I heard was, and moving across the interior, and then it went into static, and I was like, wait a second, that's it. And I didn't quite know why. And I called Dan. I was like, moving across the interior. He's like, it's great. What does it mean? I'm like, I don't know. It's a weather pattern. I just heard it. It went from static. All this came from static. My great uncle's photographs were just static until they became present in like the kinetic now of us, you know, kind of resurrecting them and combining with my images and creating this new language and this conversation with someone I never met before. So it can be like this like frenetic activity of where like you get these small signals that kind of open up in a blip when you're driving, walking through the exhibition, and it goes into this kind of static hymn again. So he bought it. And then we also thought like, well, wait a second. We can literally go across the interior of Maine. So this is part of the studio installation of just like the working area where I would be rearranging prints, stacking them, and I'll get to that in a second. And then to get back to my point, if you can't tell, I meander sometimes. We took a road trip halfway through the show for 3 days where we circumnavigated Maine, and I would make all new works for the exhibition, and I would reprint the works and recombine them with new photographs I printed from spots where we kind of figured out where my great uncle had photographed. We didn't make it across the entire area because we found out that even with my 4x4 97 Jeep Cherokee Sport, that in the middle of March in Maine, you need chains and a much bigger truck. So we made it all the way out to Allagash, and then we went on some hunting roads and saw a gray wolf, and we turned around and went down through the center of Maine. So we went across the interior as much as we could. And this is another one of the works that was in the show. This is a journal I had that when I was living on Peaks Island. I still make these. When I make darkroom color prints, I'll just, I have a perfect binding machine at my studio, so I'll bind a bunch of pages together, and then I'll use an old print, or in this case, I had been photographing the trip from, it's a 15-minute boat ride. There's no bridges that go to Peaks Island from Portland, Maine. So when I was living out there every day with my medium format camera, just out of habit and just to do something during the boat ride, I photographed the ocean, or Casco Bay, just recording the light and the changing water when I had to commute into work every day. So in the morning and in the evening, every day, even when I went in just for a grocery run, I had a whole bunch of images of the sea, and they were all just these kind of generic images of the sea. And then I made this journal. I just cropped down a contact sheet, made it to the front and back cover, and stuck it in my back pocket. And didn't think of it as an art object. I just thought it would be a cool cover for my journal. So what ended up happening over the course of 3 years is that it started off looking like this, and over 3 years, the material composition of the journal broke down as I threw it in my backpack or in my back pocket. It would be raining and we get wet. And this is over the course of scanning it on a flatbed scanner over the course of 3 years. And it's called Sea Journal 2011, 2013. And it gets exhibited as a triptych. But it all just started with this journal that, again, it wasn't meant to be an art object. It was just something I thought might be interesting to reference, my daily sea journal, going from Portland to Peaks Island. So this riffed on some of my grandfather's photographs, which were in the show, like this one. He shot with a medium format camera. I believe this format is 6x9. So we had the Sea Journal triptych set up, and this was a larger print that was next to it. And there was also other ones. This one from a lake in northern Maine. My lover, she's taking a swim. And then this photograph of, I'm not sure who, but possibly my great uncle on a boat during sunset. So there were just these really visceral connections that we want to make in the exhibition. Sometimes it's just because the images look gorgeous next to each other, and they could create a narrative in the viewers' minds that we don't have to dictate. We just are suggestive. And so it was a lot of fun. And this is a vitrine that we borrowed for the show, and I included a bunch of his 60mm film reels, some photographs he took, some photographs I took. This is a family heirloom blanket that we had in there. So there was some images I had scanned from the 60mm videos that were also on display in the exhibition. Another sea print I made of Raymond Carver's Ultramarine collection of poetry as a new dust jacket, because I thought the design of the original one was garbage, so I made one that I thought was better. Some postcards from Maine and his canoe trips mixed with photographs from my studio and also from views down the river. And also some older, again, one of his old VHS videos, these strange, beautiful, probably just store-bought flowers being filmed. It was really just like this one little blip of film, and that was it. I had no idea why there was anything on there, on a VHS tape in the middle of winter. And then this photograph of mine that I had not taken based on that image. It just was something I had made earlier that summer. So again, just trying to kind of talk to the echoes of the past with my descendant. That's my great Aunt Mary with her pet raccoon on a leopard couch. And that's when I gave up and realized he's a better photographer than me. and that was their cabin up in Maine. And this is this is in Caribou, Maine, a traffic cam that, since it was all the way up in Caribou, this was a really large print. When you get up close to it, I basically just had watched the traffic cam because that's one of the areas where me and the curator went on a road trip. And I really love this kind of omniscient prospect view as far as the landscape goes that these traffic cams can sometimes have, showing you the lay of the land, yet every now and then, due to weather or them just having some glitches, you get this beautiful kind of static that obscures the image. And it referenced to me a little bit of the silk screening and also just the old VHS tape qualities, how they get degraded over time. So really just kind of like learning from the past, learning from my own work, learning from his work. And again, this was a postcard that he had, so just having them riff off of each other. This is an hourglass. That's a photograph of me pouring seashells into a photograph that was taped on the wall of my friend pouring sand. So you can turn it either way, but I like this way because it's less linear. And other works from other places were included. This is a rock in the Salton Sea. I just love the striation of the rock, just showing all the time that had passed just on this rock sitting in the middle of such an abandoned place. And it just seemed to work really, really well with the riffs on time between my work and my great uncle's. And then there was these swamp tapes, which I had seen over, this is the first photograph I ever took of it. Then as it degraded over the years, when spring came and then summer, it slowly vanished into the earth. And moving on, this is a show I had in the summer of 2019 at the Atlanta Contemporary. This is a pretty wide array of works, some photograms, some photographs, some more sculptural works. Again, just to give you an idea of the layout. Nothing's in the center of the room because I'm not a sculptor. It felt a little empty, but I did what I could. And so these are similar material to the color photograms I would use, but it's transparency paper and it's really thick. It's synthetic, so you can't rip it. You have to use scissors or a knife to cut it. It's highly durable. And this is from a series of random walks where, again, I would go out and I would randomly walk around and collect different debris around my studio, mostly organic debris. Take it in and make photographs similar to the way the last ambient works were made. But these were always geared to be window pieces, to be installed either outdoors or in the center of a place that had almost like a cathedral type of lighting. And the lighting on the ground changed during the time of day. This is installed in the one window they had in the space. And this is one of my favorite photographs I ever made. It's a screenshot of my phone. And it's called Jungle Code. And so it was when you first walked in the exhibition, and I thought of it, it's when I first started using my phone a lot as both using screenshots and using the phone to then basically use the images, print them out on a laser printer, then manipulate them a bunch through post-processing techniques. I'll get into that later, but I really love the overall jungle feel to it, how you can't really see the buttons, and it is a photographic moment in the sense that I paused after typing in 2 of the digits, and I thought, oh, it's like opening a gate. It's like opening a gate into this world that you're about to step into the exhibition. And it was a smaller print. It was like 16 by 20 inches.
Brian,
Yeah.
I'm going to just say that some of the students will have to leave because it's been about an hour.
Yeah,
So
I
like,
tried to time this, so we're almost there.
Okay, great. So just so you know.
Yeah. And here's some more of the installation shots from Atlanta Contemporary. Again, a lot of different type of techniques. The photogram in the center, this is called Wildcat. I won't get into how this is made, but it was really fun. This is more using a cell phone actually on paper and basically using negative I had printed out that was about 40 by 40 inches and laying it on top of the paper and using my cell phone to just kind of make graffiti onto the paper. And the original source material came from this place called Ramasco Lane in Portland. Ramasco Ridge was where I had my studio. There was always people graffitiing alongside the Jersey barrier, so I thought I'd do my part and do one on my paper. And again, some more installation views. This one is called Debris of the Days. It's a bunch of fabric prints that I made over the years. And it's just basically an accumulation of a bunch of different tests and different types of materials that I at first kind of dismissed and I didn't quite know what to do with. So it's almost like I'm kind of hanging them out to dry, and it creates like this kinetic collage where you can go over and you can take some prints off, put them back on. So it's interactive in that sense where you can move works around if you want to. This set of photograms called Palm Fade, Midnight in the Garden, where I put my hand on the sheet of paper and then would expose it again to different plants, flora and fauna around the garden, so my hand slowly dissolves as you go down the images. And real quick, this is an installation I did in my gallerist out in the Hamptons, his studio space garage. There's my Jeep on the left, and there's me in there trying to set it up. It's called Reflected Projections, Projecting Reflections, and that title signifies there's a projector on the left, and it projects onto a grid of mirrors. It's totally modular. It could go in this room, however big the projection is. That's where I grid out 1 foot by 1 foot mirrors. Those project back to the source of the illumination, and it's interactive, so you can walk through it. And all the slides are composed of small geometric abstractions that I cut off from the bottom of those lattice ambient prints. I started making them in transparencies. So these tiny, tiny 35 millimeter cutouts of the debris from that. So as you can see over here, I'm standing in the middle of it, and it's on a self-timer, so it's an ongoing loop. But just to say that at no point do I think that you should think like, you know, there's no high, there's no low anymore. For example, this was permanently installed at an optical shop. My buddy in Portland, Maine runs a eyewear store called North Optical, and we gridded out the mirrors in the back, and it's a nocturnal exhibition every night. It goes from sundown to sun up, and he closes up the store, takes out the projector, presses play, and you can go see it tonight if you want to drive to Portland. And it's a loop of all the same types of gridded out images, and when you get in close, it has these really, really beautiful refractions that go across the street. And this is a more recent show I had this past summer in the Hamptons. I'll go super quick through this. This is me making a photogram of a piece of paper, a huge mural paper out in the water in the ocean. It didn't wash away. I set up a camera to document it being exposed. That's me holding the flash up top, exposing the paper, and that's me installing it the next day. There's another view of it. It's called Indian Wells Salton Sand. These are called Tides of the Day, a riff off of Blinky Palermo's Times of the Day. These are videos, stills from my phone, where I'd record the high tide and low tide every day I was there, and I would then overlay from second to second from each day. As you can see, they're slightly off, and create these moire patterns that then interacted with the kinetic activity of the waves. And these are all 8 by 10 inch contact prints. And there's the grid of the days I was there. That's how it started. There's some more of them. And this is just using, again, that flash as a light source, a piece of glass, and some laser prints, and some darkroom paper. That's me trying to install work. This is a phone photo of the sunset at Indian Wells Beach. I set up a projector, again, because I didn't have an enlarger I could use, and this is me plotting out that image, which then turned into this huge bitmap because of the fact that I use a laser printer and my iPhone to make the image. I process them in this big old roll, and chemistry gets everywhere. And then I use a hose to spray them down at night, leave them out to dry, put some books on the edges to flatten them out, and then install them. And that's the set. And last but not least, these last three, this one's titled Memorial. It's a photograph that my father initially sent me, mixed with, so he sent me a photograph through his cell phone, and he's terrible at texting and everything, but he sends me these amazing photographs sometimes of his garden. And so this is from a newer series called Conversations with My Father. And so what I do is I then take them, put them in the back of my camera, make them into a negative, and then slowly but surely, after putting them in the back of my camera, photographing them against a white wall or sometimes against the garden going back in the spring, they'll slowly start to deteriorate, which is why you get these scratch marks on here. And the laser print is a really low quality on purpose, so it almost has like this crosshatch pattern that looks like it's almost got a fabric-like pattern to it. And so just to give you a good idea, this is originally a photograph of the morning glories he sent me about 3 years ago that were blooming in the front yard. And then I went in and Photoshop and deleted everything but this, and I printed it as a laser print on expired color darkroom paper. So you can see I just basically selected everything out except for the morning glories. And this one is titled Morning Glory Flower Tower. And I tend to think of a lot of my newer works as being repropagated, so this one is now also this image, which is 20 by 24 inches, so there might be like 5 of them, or there might be no more. So take a drink of water. That's it. Any questions? Let me know. Thank you.
I'll just stand up so I can see everyone. Pretty rapt audience, actually, and I'm sure that some people can ask questions of Bryan. There's a lot to think about there.
Yeah, I try not to make it too insane, but
yeah,
not so.
I mean, there's just a lot to think about. And there's a number of students here who are seniors, thinking about their own work, thinking about I think, to listen to you talk through sort of your practice, may be really helpful to a lot of them. I'm really inspiring. So, are there questions from the audience?
Yeah.
Did you get the chance to meet your great-grandfather?
No, it was my great uncle, but no, I never got a chance to meet him, which makes it all the more interesting, I think. I got to meet his brother, my great uncle Stuss, when he was alive, but they were both bricklayers who came over from Denmark. They're the first generation of my family, and not much is really known about him by the rest of my family. I don't know if there's stuff they don't want to tell, but the photographs are just remarkable that he has, and it was just I don't know, I still look through them and I'm just like, I can't believe no one ever was like, hey, you like photography? Your great uncle, he was pretty good. But no, I never got the chance to meet him.
I'm interested, so is most of your work just like a single, not multiple? Is most of it just like the piece is the original and there's not a multiple? Because I'm thinking about like photography is, typically traditionally a medium of the multiple and reproducible, but as I'm looking at all your work, I'm thinking that a lot of it is just the single piece.
Yeah, it's odd. There's a good portion of it now that is, but I try to keep this to exactly an hour, and trust me, you won't want to hear me blab it on for another hour. There's a lot of other work that is more like traditional, like straightforward photographs that I can mix in with, like the photograms and some of the other works. But yeah, there's something about trying to figure out how to manipulate the medium into something that has a very tactile and, I don't know if unique is the right word, but like a very individual feel. And I always end up being really gravitated towards trying to figure out how to make in a realm that is so heavily, overly produced, you know, as far as a visual form of communication. How can I create something that you won't really get to know a sense of it unless you see it in person? Like even seeing these on the screen, I'm kind of always just like, I gotta like bring prints and just, you know, like there's something that I'm always pushing against with displaying, like even showing this why I zoom in, it's just like the tactility is something I love about working, and I really am averse to screen. It hurts my eyes. Like I can't sit down for very long. So yeah, just to, I guess, I don't know if I'm making any sense, but just the physicality of moving around paper as material, and also as just like immersing myself in the materials, is something I really, really love.
Yeah, I was trying, because as I was watching it, you know, like, I make paintings, so I think of, like, I look at work and I start to think of it through the realm of my experience, and and I'm like, you know, oh, they're painterly, but I'm like, no, they're prints, but I'm like, no, but they're not. They're, you know, because when you talk about, you know, silk screening, but that's still really about the multiple, there's something that, and, you know, but then there's also something that's kind of almost choreographed about the way that you interact with them. Like you were talking about having to move your body in different distances from the light to get a certain color and a certain look. And, and I think that was what was interesting to me, is that like I kept, you know, like the pin that I kept putting kept moving.
Yeah.
I was watching it and going, well, you know, trying to put it in here, trying to put it in here. And, you know, so it's like, I think it's interesting that they kind of started to transcend a little bit of classification in that way.
Thanks. Yeah, it's definitely something that's come up before, especially in relationship to painting. But the thing I love about them, like as the photograms, is that they're totally flat. You know, they don't have a surface at all. But using such a stringent amount of materials, just like a light source, a couple flashes, and then screen, I just found that using less and less, how much you can squeeze out of that has been really, really invigorating, and kind of, you know, seeing what happens when you just limit yourself through constraint materials. Yeah.
I was just wondering if you've ever worked in like video, or even if your work is even like possible with video.
I have tried really terribly. I have some pretty good iPhone videos. No, I'm not even kidding. There's a couple that I was considering, but it is actually something, especially having looked through my grandfather's 8mm, 60mm, great uncle's films, just like the noise of the projector and like the visceral quality of it, and which is also why I love, like, the closest I've come is to using the slide projectors for the reflected projections, where like you hear the clicking of the projector, you're like literally physically in there. Your presence as an audience member makes the piece. It kind of doesn't exist without people walking through it, without getting close to the projector, without getting close to the mirrors. So I don't know, maybe someday. I feel like I'm getting there, and I work really slow. So maybe when I'm like 70, I'll make a video.
I was wondering if like the process by which you make like the photograms, is that possible with using video? Still like film, but
I have no idea. I mean, if it's film, you could do something like that, but I don't know. You would have to like unroll the film, do a lot of tests, reload it through, or develop it and see what happens. So,
see what happens.
if you want to try, good luck. I'm game. I will take a look and consult. Anybody else?
I have mine.
Sure.
I was interested in, I don't know, with your great uncle's photo and then yours, the sort of inclination to document time, right, that he holds up the sign. By the way, that's my birthday. And then the other one was my wedding anniversary, so I was like, I'm in here. Just needed to find myself here too. But just, you know, the sort of sense of sort of documenting a date or documenting a place. You know, do you feel connected to that dating thing that he did there, or is that something that just sort of happens sometimes or not?
I do with those works because they are of a time and place, you know, like especially when in springtime when it's blooming, like if I make one on April 11th and make one on April 12th, they'll look vastly different. And so, yeah, especially with the shot reverse shot works, that like kind of time tracking is important. Also with those wave works that I went through really quick, like the fact that they all say today on them, and it's laid out in calendar format from low tide to high tide each day. So it's almost like every day is happening simultaneously. So I love the push and pull between time, like rewinding and fast forward at the same time. I've actually talked to Mark about this, like I feel like during COVID, it's like our hands are both heavily on rewind and fast forward, and then we go like that, and where are we now, you know? Maybe a little farther back, maybe we're just like static, stuck on the screen. It's just been one of those times where time itself is very vaporous. So.
Shady, do you have a question?
Oh, yeah. Well, I was just going to ask about, like, kind of where you started, because I know you said that your mom was, like, an art teacher, and I was just curious if you had any background in, like, drawing or painting. I know that, like, a lot of your, like, higher education has dealt with photography, but I was curious, like, where you started, because kind of like Professor Rickler pointed out, like, some of your work is really painterly, which is so interesting because they're photographs, so I was just curious if you had any type of, like, experience in that when maybe when you were younger, like, has it always been?
Yeah, no, it hasn't. I did, like, you know, I took high school art and like AP art and all that stuff, and I painted a lot then. But I really gravitated towards the camera because it was something I could do on my own. I still do, and I like just like wandering alone, you know, around, and it was a great way to just like record stuff by myself. And I hate to admit it, but I'm really impatient, which is also why photography helps. And these photograms where like I can, especially the smaller Polaroids, like I just gotta wait a minute and 20 seconds and I can see what it is, and it's right there. It's like now. I want to see what's going on. Even today, these days, I mean, I know it sounds crazy for someone who might be like a drawer, painter, sculptor. I'm watching the clock when I'm processing black and white paper, and it only takes like 7 minutes from start to finish. Like there's something wrong with me with that, as far as time goes. But as far as who I look at, like artists that inspire me, by far and large, it's more painters and sculptors and performance artists than it is photographers. I find, quite honestly, most photography pretty boring. But hopefully no photographers get offended, but it's just kind of true. And it's also, you know, there's like the whole distinction between, which is such an academic way to look at it, like in the 70s, like artists who started using photographers versus photographers. It's like, well, if it's a picture, then it's a picture. Yeah, so it's like, don't give me this whole like, Nancy Holt made a video, but she's a sculptor. It's like, yeah, she did both though. Like, give her credit. She could do a lot of different things. She made drawings, she made paintings, she made photographs, she made sculptures. Like, just because, you know, there's been a canon that was dominant, that was mostly her work was exposed to, doesn't mean that we should just like label it like being a sculptor first, and then other art stuff second. Like, I'm fine with people calling my works like painterly and, you know, more sculptural. I would say I'm at the bare bones of what I do, the way I approach things is as a photographer. So I consider myself a photographer, for better or worse, just because that's the way I look at things. But it doesn't mean that all these other mediums aren't just like always flooding in there, you know. So if that answers your question at all.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you, Bryan, for your generosity and
Yeah,
for
thank
standing
you.
all the way through.